Hello everyone, Alan here with the leadership plan, transitioning from being a group member to being a supervisor and to being an effective leader is a very difficult transition, and perhaps the hardest transition for people that come into these roles is learning how to hold people accountable for your minimum performance standards. Recently I was speaking with a friend of mine who was a store manager for various stores of IKEA in Europe, and eventually became like the HR manager for all of Europe for IKEA. And I was talking to her about how I conducted my recent semi-annual evaluations, and she was super impressed with how much effort and energy I put into them. And in the course of that conversation, she asked herself whether perhaps in her career she gave too many chances to underperformers. These individuals are on every team. Almost any team, even the most elite team, has what I call stinkers or just underperformers on them. These individuals take up a lot of your time and energy in coaching, in prodding them, in providing feedback, and in your effort to try and get them up to your minimum performance standard. So as a supervisor, it's a tricky balance between investing all of this time and energy into someone that is underperforming and knowing when it's enough, you've given enough effort and energy, and when it's time for just free that person up to go and work at another organization and contribute to a different team. In this video, we will look at what you can do to lead underperformers so that at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road, you know that you've done everything in your power to try and bring them up to the minimum performance expectations for members of your team. Okay, number one, and this is perhaps the most important, you have to set very clear performance expectations for each member of your team and for the different work areas that they are covering. These expectations need to be clear, they need to be very concise, and they should be tied to the performance evaluation moments that you have scheduled throughout the year, specifically the semi-annual and the annual evaluation. Nobody on your team, when you give them negative feedback, should be surprised by the negative feedback. They should already know that they're not meeting your minimum expectations because it's something that you bring up in meetings, you bring them up in your team meetings, you bring them up in specific individual meetings with the team members. And so it's very clear to them for these different work areas, this is your minimum performance standard. This is what they need to do to meet the minimum performance standard. That should be something that you do constantly. You should do that in the interview. Like when you interview somebody for the position, you should already be speaking about this. It should be something that you do during your onboarding. And again, it should be something that you do weekly in the meetings and monthly meetings that you have with your team members. So no one should be surprised when you give them a negative evaluation or sever your relationship with them because they're not meeting your minimum performance expectations. So that's really, really important. Setting clear expectations for what you expect for the minimum performance standard. The second really important thing that you need to do as a supervisor so that when you do sever your relationship with an underperformer, and you know that you've done everything that you can, you need to collect data. You must have really good data on their performance so that you can tie their actual activity to your performance, minimum performance standards when you're giving them evaluations and giving them feedback. So on this, I would say you should only measure what you really care about. You can get into the situation where you're collecting too much data. And so I would collect data that is directly tied to their activities, which are directly tied to the core responsibilities of your office or of your organization. Those core responsibilities should be tied to the mission of your organization and to the success or failure of your organization. There are a lot of wonderful online tools now. In my office, we use Teams by Microsoft, and they have built-in project and task management systems, and so folks leave comments and move things forward, and it's all date and time stamped. So that's real data that I can go in and look at and provide information with the underperformer about how long it takes them to complete tasks, how much activity they put into a task, and so on and so forth. So data is really important. You can't set minimum performance standards and then not have any data to back up your assessment of the employee that's underperforming. Data is really important. Hey, if you're finding something useful in this video and it's helping you decide how to better approach those underperformers, the ones that kind of get stuck under your skin, please consider hitting like on this video. That way YouTube algorithm will send it out to more people who, just like you, are struggling with this and want some solutions for getting underperformers back up to your minimum performance standard. Thank you. The third thing that I would say is messaging. I already talked about this a little bit, but your messaging on your minimum performance standards should be constant. There should never be a moment where you let up and just kind of let them skate by. You should be preaching this at your one-on-one meetings with the employees and also at the group meetings. You should be reminding them, remember, this is our benchmark for this work group. And for this other work area, these are my expectations. These are the targets that you all are expected to hit on, time to complete tasks or the volume of tasks that you complete, so on and so forth. So that should be just constant. The messaging that you provide to your team should be constant. It should be right on the forefront of their mind. It should be something that they themselves can repeat out loud to you without even, guessing. In fact, that's one thing that I do in the meetings. I will tell them to tell me, okay, what's our performance expectations for these different tasks? And so that's a good way to just keep this really at the forefront of their mind while they're trying to complete these tasks. And again, the other thing that I would say on messaging is that you should also tie these performance expectations to their semi-annual and their annual. So when you're going over each work area and say, here's our minimum performance standards for this work area and so on and so forth, you can say the reason why this is important is because on your semi-annual, if you're not hitting these performance standards, you're going to get a bad semi-annual. Or on your annual, if you're not hitting these performance standards over the course of the 12 months, then you're going to get a bad annual evaluation. So that should be clearly tied to their important performance evaluation moments. And then finally, it's the semi-annual and the annual. This is where the rubber really meets the road. This is the culmination of all the work that you've done in setting clear expectations, gathering data, and the constant messaging that you've done to make sure that they know what the minimum performance standards are and where they need to be by the semi-annual and the annual. So at the semi-annual and the annual evaluations, this is where you would go in, look at the last 6 months for the semi-annual, get all of the data that you can that's pertinent specifically for the task that they're responsible for, and then provide a comprehensive report for the employee at the semi-annual. So when you sit down and say your performance is a 2.5 out of 5, and you can back all of that up with data, they can't come back and say, well, I didn't understand that, or I don't think so, I did work harder than that. You've got actual data on their actual performance. And so that's at 6 months, right? So this whole process could take a year. That's at 6 months. And then at the annual evaluation, that's usually when the performance evaluation that you provide to the employee has actual teeth to it. And that's where I feel like, to answer the question of this video, how many chances do you give underperformers? I feel like at the annual, if you have done all of this work over the last 12 months, then you can feel confident as a supervisor in severing your relationship with that employee. You can tell them, look, I gave you a semi-annual and you were underperforming. I coached you, I told you what my expectations were, and yet you failed to do that, and so we're going to move on. At your organization, it might be more difficult to fire people, so you can certainly start some kind of performance improvement plan. You can work with HR typically on this, but you can feel confident after an entire year for somebody that's underperforming. So these are not employees that don't show up to work. They're actually working and they're getting work done. They're just a little bit below what you would consider to be the minimum acceptable standard, right? So you can coach them and work with them for a year, or however long your performance cycle is. But then after that, I would not allow that relationship like that to continue. The reason for this is because underperformers are like a cancer on your organization. They will monopolize your time and energy, and they will also bring the morale down of your entire team, because when you're all sitting on a boat together, pulling in the same direction, everyone's going to know who's pulling hard and who's not really pulling very hard on those paddles. And your underperformers are going to lower the morale because your top performers are going to see that there's no consequences for not pulling with the rest of the team. And so it's really important to take care of this. If you're going to become an effective supervisor and a leader, this is really maybe the most important thing that you have to do and have to learn. I will see you guys in the next one.